So this meeting is for planning and zoning and the city council to discuss our roles in the jobs that we have for the city. I'll turn it over to you, Ryan.
So thank you for everybody. This was a discussion, shortly after I came in to kind of get the Planning and Zoning Commission together as well as the City Council, to kind of see where those two lines intersect. I reached out to the folks at the American Planning Association who put me in touch with Chance Sparks, who I'm coordinating with. He's with Fries and Nichols. He's come up. He's going to provide a presentation on kind of what the roles and responsibilities of elected and appointed officials are, and what the Planning and Zoning Commission does, what council does, and how we can get those two to work together in tandem to make for progress for the city. So, Chance. Okay. Apparently, the technical difficulties we had during the Planning and Zoning Commission have been resolved, and this meeting will be recorded and live streamed.
It has to be green.
All right, how's that? There we go. All right, this does feel very Price is Right.
Would you like to sit? You may. Or
I may wander around a little bit.
Okay.
That's what I tend to do. I kind of get happy feet. So my name is Chance Sparks. I'm with Fries and Nichols. I run our urban planning design group for the company. It's about 29 planners and landscape architects. But the real reason I'm here is I'm the immediate past president of the American Planning Association Texas chapter. So if you were to go back in time a little bit before the time of pandemics and things like that, we actually used to do a whole lot of commission and council training. That is one of the things that got impacted coming through the pandemic. Like most volunteer organizations, volunteers got stretched, they got worn out, and then they stopped returning phone calls. So that's kind of getting you into where we are today. We're starting to rebuild this effort. And Urian reached out to me saying, hey, y'all have had some changes, some turnover, and y'all would like to have a better understanding of how to make this work better going forward. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You do have a copy of the presentation. I took a look at what this building looked like on Street View, and I was like, yeah, I'm not bringing a projector. There's really nowhere for me to point it. And so we'll just go analog style this time. There are some basic ground rules that I like to have for this. They are not particularly serious, but they're worth knowing. Big ones is you can ask any question that comes to mind. I assure you it will not shock me. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've seen a lot of weird stuff. It'll be fine. So don't be bashful. Also, feel free to interrupt me. If you have questions along the way, wave your hand. I will let you know I'm about half deaf in both ears. Managed to explode both eardrums over the holidays. It's been a real party. I blame my 4-year-old. I will also ask you questions. So that's where you get to participate and play along with me and have some fun. Also, I don't know how well y'all all know each other, but I have a rule for these types of things. Y'all have all heard of the golden rule. You've all heard of that at some point? Okay, there's another version of that. I call it the platinum rule. Golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Platinum rule is treat others the way they wish to be treated, which is a little bit different. So that's just something I want to emphasize. Also, this is a joint meeting. Some of you are council. Some of you are commissioners. For the purposes of this, y'all are all really commissioners. You just insert into the process at different times. So all this is going to be relevant as we go along. So that's just something to keep in mind along the way. I'm going to wander over there so I have somewhere to set this down as I work through this. But if you flip to the next one, it's kind of the why are we here? And I think I will take y'all up on the offer of sitting too. Now I'm realizing I have to work. I only have 2 hands. It's only going to work so well. So it's understanding what are your various responsibilities. To help me out, how many of y'all were an elected official or appointed official with Morgan's Point Resort 2 years ago? So 3 of you.
What was the question?
So there's been a little bit of change.
I'm on that.
You're on that too? 4. 4 out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like out of like 12. That's a lot of change. A lot of y'all are very new to these roles. So this is going to be about figuring out how to do your job well and kind of getting you through well, for those of you that are elected, you've been elected, now what? And those of you that are appointed, I just got appointed to something. Wait, what did I volunteer for? And you're also well compensated too. So finding the time to do this is also a thing. So we want to think about how to work together towards shared goals, things like that. Having a meeting like this is step 1. This is something y'all should probably do once a year. Get the Planning and Zoning Commission together with your city council. Talk through things that you're seeing going on. I heard y'all talk about doing annual reports, things like that. That's usually where that annual report gets presented. And sometimes maybe a work plan if the commission has said like, hey, this is what we did last year. Next year, we'd like to tackle these 3 things. What do you think, council? And council says, yes, go forth. Or that's a terrible idea, please stop. Whatever happens. And so it's a really good check-in point for that, because in the ideal perfect world, your planning and zoning commission is doing the heavy lifting on key issues. So that way at the city council, your job is maybe just a little bit easier. It never gets really easy though. If y'all been through a budget process yet, you already know that. So that's kind of the setup. So next page has our topics that we're going to go through today. I'm going to go through some boring stuff, kind of the origin of your authority. Where does it come from? What are your responsibilities? How do you have a high quality meeting? Which is not as easy as it sounds. You're going to get to learn about Robert's Rules of Order, things that you probably have heard about and never had to understand. And then you're going to learn about it and you're going to wish you never had to learn it. How to avoid trips to the courthouse, because getting sued is unpleasant. Being an expert witness for that is also unpleasant. So I like to encourage cities to avoid that. And then how do you work together to set your strategic goals and priorities as you go forward? It's really great that y'all are working on a comprehensive plan right now. That's kind of a good reset button for a lot of those things. Hopefully what you get out of that is a really solid, here's where you should go from here. That's what I would hope for. And you also talked about things like updating codes. One thing I will tell y'all, there are resources available for that. General Land Office has a program called the Resilient Communities Program. Are y'all in Bell County? Yeah. Bell County is an eligible county under that program. It has money available that does not involve a match to update codes, update plans, things like that, up to $300,000.
Tell me the name of this thing again.
Yeah, General Land Office, and it's the Resilient Communities Program. You have to check certain boxes with what you're doing with it, but they're easy boxes to check. So that's something that is out there for y'all. And I don't know if y'all have grant administrators y'all work with, but they can get you all familiar with it. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking through today. So next page. How do we build the perfect commissioner or perfect council member? Can we all agree that none of us in this room are perfect council members or perfect commissioners? Step 1. Okay. So how do you build somebody that is perfect? And when I say how do you make it perfect, you're never going to get an individual that has all of these things, but you as a group should be able to create this. So what we look for is can you be visionary? Do you understand what you have going for you in Morgan's Point Resort here? And I have to remember to say Morgan's Point Resort because there's a Morgan's Point over near Galveston. So try to remember that. What are the strengths? What are the opportunities? What are your challenges? It's understanding what keeps people up at night here. And having a good grasp of the big picture. Where are you trying to go as a community, but not missing the details in the process. What you'll find as a planning and zoning commissioner is at one moment you're talking about a comprehensive plan that's very high level, and then your next agenda item is a subdivision plat of 1.5 acres on Bob's Road somewhere. It's a drastic change in scale that you're going to deal with pretty regularly. So you have to be able to have that ability to do that. Not having conflicts of interest. Shouldn't have to say this, but we do. We'll actually talk through what is a conflict of interest here in a little bit, if you haven't already gotten that bludgeoned into you by your city attorney. If they haven't done that to you yet, it's coming. How to be impartial and objective. Basically, it's how can you set aside your personal perspectives and kind of think, okay, step back for the city, is this the right thing or not? It's having that ability to do that. How do you work towards common good? How do you work towards community interest above all else? So you see a little graphic here. You see public interest, public opinion. It's a Venn diagram. They don't completely overlap. One of the things that I always talk to elected officials about, appointed officials about, is public opinion and public interest are not the same thing. Sometimes you have to be the grown-up in the room and make the hard decision. Thinking about if you have children, yes, the child says they want candy. Do you always give them candy? Well, if you're a grandparent, yes. But if you're a parent, generally no, right? Same principle holds true. You're elected to be representative. You're expected to do that job. I often warn y'all that, if you're in this to make new friends, got bad news. You're not going to come out with more friends than when you went in, just as a rule. So, not trying to, kind of poo-poo it, but it's going to be challenging. Come prepared for meetings. Read the stuff in advance. Be ready to talk about it. Be somebody that likes to hear different ideas and different perspectives. Don't necessarily mean that you just automatically follow them, but you like to hear that. You like that collaborative atmosphere, even if you don't agree. Maybe you like a little bit of debate, as long as you're nice about it. Are you practical and creative? Are you consistent? And then the last one, which has gotten increasingly important, if you've watched any YouTube videos of public meetings, being cool-headed. The way the public responds now in public meetings from when I started my career and today are two very different things. What you see today tends to be a little bit more sharp, a little bit more aggressive, sometimes threatening. It's really important for y'all as board members and council members to be able to maintain a cool head. Don't let it get the best of you. You will have people that will say really terrible things to you at some point. They will tell you that you probably just got bribed with McDonald's by the developer. I've actually had that before. I'm like, you think that one of my commissioners sold out for a $7 Big Mac meal? Please. Takes at least a steak. No, I'm just kidding. But it's being able to think about that. So flipping to the next page, what are some of the other responsibilities? It's being prepared. Reading and studying case materials, already heard me say that. But visit the sites. There is no substitute for laying your own eyes on something. You will see things that don't show up on a plan. What I sometimes talk about is you'll see on a plan, you'll see topography lines. How many of you know how to read a topographic map? Quarter of y'all. So it's better to actually go out there, look at the site and say, okay, I see this. I understand what I'm looking at now. Even if you know how to read it, you can probably maybe do a slope calculation in your head, but seeing it in person hits different. So visit the sites. Try to avoid receiving information outside the process. That's just not a good look. And ask your staff questions. I know y'all don't have a big staff, but they're salty. They've got the ability to find answers for you. So ask the questions. Be fair, be honest, be ethical, be objective. That's kind of the basics of, it's actually not a bad way just to go through life in general. So it's also life advice. We're adding that to the agenda too. When we talk about understanding the job of the commissioner, this is now the page that has the Capitol building. You need to be familiar with your responsibilities and expectations. What we often talk about is you're now an ambassador. You don't get to leave your identity as a city council member when you leave the council room. If you're lucky as a commissioner, you might get to do that until people figure out who you are. And then you will inevitably have that trip to the grocery store where you're going to get bread and milk, and it takes an hour because somebody corners you. It's happened to me. So it's understanding that never departs, which means some of those rules about being cool-headed, things like that, they've got to follow you. Some basic orientation. You have legal issues that come with this job. Have y'all been through your Open Meetings Act training yet? Was it very, very exciting? What about open records? Did you go through that? Was it exciting? No. Is it important? Yes. So those are state mandated trainings. Make sure you've got those. Understand the basic elements of planning. I'll touch on some of this as we go through. Read your comprehensive plan. Shouldn't have to say that, but sometimes you do. Read your zoning and development regulations. If your development regulations are more than about 10 to 20 years old, you'll read about a third of the way through it, and then you will want to scream. Because inevitably they have been amended and updated, and in the course of doing so, they've created conflicts, or they've just used really weird wording. Attorneys are very prone to that. So, but read your regulations, read your subdivision regulations, understand where your authority comes from. So, when we think about basic elements of planning, it's really understanding what you are as a community, where you're trying to go, how you're trying to get there. That's your basic of what it is. If you've been going through your comp plan, you're already familiar with this, hopefully. And the last thing is you're never too experienced to need training. Going through and getting a good refresh on what your roles are and things like that every few years is a good idea. Because you forget, or you just get so used to it that you stop thinking about it. So that's definitely something you want to think about as you go through. Now we get to the exciting part. Because I believe this has been specifically exciting in Morgan's Point Resort. The kind of city you are drives how you plan and regulate. So y'all are all familiar that Morgan's Point has had a conversation about a home rule charter at some point. There was absolutely no controversy with it, and it went through swimmingly. There was no excitement, right? That's not how it went, right? Yeah, it's so. Cities, when they kind of reach that 5,000 threshold, they get to have that big conversation. It's increasingly rare for a city to have that conversation only once. A community that I used to work for had their home rule charter election 4 times before it actually passed. To the point where I was like, why do y'all keep doing this? Please stop. But it's a really important difference because if you don't have the home rule status, that means you are a general law city. Basics of that is whatever the legislature says you can do, you can do. If the legislature is silent on it, probably not, unless it falls directly under like police powers, things like that. So things that are implied, and then like the things that are inherent to government function, that type of thing. But you can't go beyond that. Your alternative is home rule. You get a little bit more flexibility. In that regard, it means that you can do anything you want, basically, as long as it's within the bounds of law. And if the law is silent, go for it. Have a good time. We always caution cities on that just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. I would often point towards some larger cities that are close to where I'm from. I'm from San Marcos. There's a very large city north of San Marcos. That does attract attention from time to time on this type of thing, and does no favors for the rest of us when the legislature decides to intervene. So what impacts y'all in Morgan's Point Resort? It's U.S. Constitution. Yes, that does apply to you. If you've done sign regulations, you'll get this firsthand. Texas Constitution, local government code, and a few other state laws. What I want to point to, though, is this blue box. Because y'all been through this conversation about home rule. What we're seeing, and this is a national issue, is state preemption of local ordinances. Basically, the state stepping in and saying, yeah, you've been doing this, not anymore, and curtailing things. It's been happening regardless of political party. It has been happening in Texas. It has been happening in Montana. It has been happening in California. All for different reasons, but all effectively the same pattern. So that's something that's important to know. Where you've seen it most in Texas has been in business operations. It's when cities try to pass minimum wage ordinances, things like that. That's what's driven the legislative interest, but the legislature has expanded the breadth at which they are trying to tackle it. We've seen building material regulations undermined through state legislative action. And then there's a whole litany of things that are now in litigation. There's a big bill that basically by a state law change, try to turn most every city into a Dillon's Rule city, into a general law city. You can't do that in the state of Texas. Home rule is enshrined in the Texas Constitution, so that means you can't repeal that through a state law. You can only repeal that through the same action, which means it would take a statewide election. Pretty unlikely that people are going to vote to say, yeah, I want the legislator that lives in Amarillo to tell me what to do when I live in Brownsville. That generally doesn't go over well. So that's just an important perspective to know in what's going on in the world around you. It makes for some exciting times. It makes for radical changes that happen very quickly. Any changes so far? Or questions so far?
I just have one.
Yeah.
The people who voted for home rule 4 times, did it have to go before the citizens to vote on it a second and third time?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So it would go to an election first and then we could vote on it. Oh,
Yeah. So what you'll see is like they'll have a home rule charter election where it establishes the charter. If it passes, then periodically, this is usually prescribed in your charter, you have set update periods where you can amend it periodically for whatever
So
change comes up.
if it fails the first time, would it then have to go before the citizens to say we approve looking into a home rule charter, or do you have it ready to go?
So what you can do, basically, I'm not saying it would be the best political choice, but if a home rule charter fails, the city could turn right back around and say, you know what, we're going to push this again and send it right back out to election without making a single change.
Okay.
It can be done. I would suggest maybe investing a little bit in time in understanding why it didn't pass, what were the key issues, and see if there's adjustments. That's actually what happened in the community where that was, is it went through 4 times, and they made adjustments each time. But each time something else was coming up. Usually because there was some, what I would call a soup du jour issue, soup of the day, that, would, insert itself into that conversation. But yeah, they're always challenging.
Okay.
Other questions? Yes.
Did I understand you to say if it does pass, it can be reversed, but it would have to go through the same process again?
Yes, that's just a rule of legislative construction. The thing that creates the thing, or the action that creates the thing, that same action is required to undo it. It's kind of just a basic legislative principle. And so I've never seen a city actually repeal their home rule charter. What you will see is it get amended over and over, altered and changed. Usually the biggest changes you'll see is if they want to alter form of government. That's the biggest one I've ever seen that actually passed. That's a big change. Yeah, it's a big change. Yeah, where he's decided that, we were council manager form of government, and actually we're flipping to a strong mayor now. That's a pretty tough change. The cities where I've seen that happen, they kind of instantly regret it a little bit, because it's like, oh, now I've got to figure this out, and I'm on my own. And typically the city manager is not really inclined to stick around. They're kind of like, well, I see how you feel about me. I'm out. And so you'll usually find yourself without a chief administrative officer of some kind pretty quickly. So just things to know. I'll give us this next slide, general powers of cities. So what can you do as a city? You have administrative oversight. That's financial and personnel. Again, you typically hire a city manager or a city administrator to handle that day to day. You have police power, and I put in there to protect the general welfare. Because when you hear police power, what do people immediately think of? They think of, person with a badge, gun on the hip. That's not actually what police power means in this instance. What it actually means is taking care of your community. So that covers, of course, police and fire, but also means, how do you handle your public facilities? How do you handle your infrastructure? Utilities, buildings, parks, that all falls under that category. And then you've got your planning and development, land use infrastructure, building standards, and again, that crosses over with that. So basically, police power, fundamental ability of government to enact laws to, I use this word intentionally, coerce its citizenry for the public good. That's what a law actually is doing. Its job is to coerce people to do something, or else they get a consequence. I also put some really cool Latin stuff in here, so if you're ever at a dinner party, you want to impress and sound really smart, just drop that on them. But it's because the police power actually goes back to Rome. So that's where it dates back to, Roman common law. So it's been around for a hot minute. Can I pronounce it? Absolutely not. Can my wife pronounce it? Who was basically that far from medical school? Yes, she's great at it. It likes to make me feel real stupid. So any questions on police power? And generally, I'll tell you is, if you aren't sure whether you have the authority, hopefully your city attorney is hanging out there at the council meeting with you. And I'll be like, please don't do that. Or, can we have an executive session under 551 point da 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 da? That means they're about to tell you that what you want to do, you can't do. So those are very rarely instances where it's not going to be a bummer when you meet with them. But important to know those things. So flipping over to, make sure I'm doing this in the right order. The types of planning and development regulation. So you, of course, have your various types of planning, your vision documents, comprehensive plan, of course, but there's also other flavors. There are what we call special area plans, like a downtown plan, corridors, small areas, neighborhood plans. These are all types of plans that cities do undertake from time to time. There's topical plans. That would be like your transportation or mobility plan. You have a parks, recreation, and open space plan, which if you don't have that, you should. It makes you eligible for grant money. And then even topics like housing or bigger cities, homelessness. There's a lot of topics that those can cover. And they're different levels, different levels of detail. Then you got your different development regulations. How many of y'all have ever heard the public say, I wish y'all were more proactive about things? What's the implication of that? That being reactive is bad, right? Proactive and reactive both have their places in running a city. Because if you were going to be proactive for everything, what does that mean? You would probably never actually accomplish anything. You would eventually reach analysis paralysis. You would just lock up and you wouldn't get anything done, and something would come with a new idea and you'd be like, we don't know what to do. We've been proactive this whole time. We have no tools for reacting to you. Please leave. And that's really just not an option. So you have to have reactive tools too. So your proactive stuff, that's capital improvements planning. That is thinking about, do you have water pressure issues somewhere? If so, what's the cause of it? Is it total available storage? Is it you don't have enough water storage up in the air to create the pressure? Is it that your pumps are trying to kill themselves? What's the issue? That's capital improvements planning. Then you have public-private partnerships. They're a form of being proactive. That's where developer has an idea or city has an idea, and you know that you could actually work together to accomplish that. Common examples that we see for that is a city wants a new city hall. A developer's got a prime piece of property that they would like to develop, and gee golly, they would sure like to have an anchor for that. Bada bing, bada boom, you work into an agreement, and now a developer has built you a city hall. It may or may not be well constructed. That's neither here nor there. But they now have an anchor for their development. You now have space that you need. That's just one example of many that are out there. And then you have your reactive stuff. That's your zoning, that's subdivision, that's other regulations. Those are purely reactive. Big thing is those two things, your planning and your development regulations, should talk to each other. We always tell cities, if you've just adopted a comprehensive plan, like the next month, you should be having a conversation about how do we update our development regulations? Because comprehensive plans have a dirty secret. About 80% of the results you want out of your comprehensive plan, you're relying on the private sector to do in some way, shape, or fashion. Private property owners, developers, things like that. They are part of your implementation. The way you put them on notice of what you want them to do, well, you adopt a plan, but you also adjust your regulations. What we always talk about is the thing that you want to have happen, make that the easiest possible thing to do in your code. The thing you don't want to happen, make that the most difficult. Don't flip those. We'll see cities that say, we really want mixed use, and things like that, which I will tell you, great for you. Mixed use is great. It is also the most expensive thing to build. It's the most difficult thing to finance, and it's the tightest specialization within building trades, because you're mixing residential usually with commercial, and it has its own series of issues that come with that. It's great, it's good, you should encourage it, but you need to make sure that your codes and everything are set up to deal with it well along the way. So that's just kind of one example where you want to make sure it's all talking to each other. Make sense? All right, y'all going to start on your codes right after you do your comprehensive plan? Everybody say yes, please. That'll make me feel better. Thank you. I have very low self-esteem. I need that encouragement.
So would you say planning and zoning is mostly reactive to things minus making sure ordinances are okay?
Generally, yes. Your Planning and Zoning Commission tends to be more reactive. It all depends on how you approach it, though. If you're creating an annual action plan, it probably means you're going to have a good mix. Usually, you are working in the space of creating new or updating development regulations, but it might be that you're working on an area plan. I'm also going to say the thing that I should not say as a consultant. You don't always need a consultant. Sometimes a plan can work just as a grassroots citizen-driven process, especially if it's a fairly direct, simple task. You feel like you've got a good grasp of it. You might be able to do the plan largely yourself. Maybe you call up a consultant at the end to say, hey, this is what we found. We need some help coming up with some ideas for what to do about it. I actually like that, because that's actually the part I like about that type of work. I would rather not do all the research and all that. I would like to get to the end where it's like, here's what we've learned. What should we do? That's fun. That's creative. So that's definitely the case there. But you might also be tackling plans. You might be tackling other issues. You could be participating in capital improvements planning for a city. San Marcos, where I live, the Planning and Zoning Commission actually largely coordinated the public process for the capital improvements planning. So that was a pretty proactive element. They also, if they have a development agreement or something like that come through, they all route through the Planning and Zoning Commission. So, and development agreements are a weird one. They're both proactive and reactive at the same time, depending on how they're structured. So it can be a little bit of everything. One of the things I would actually tell you as a commissioner, when you get appointed, is communicate what you want to work on. Tell the staff like, hey, this is what I'm interested in. And they might tell you, yeah, it's not really relevant to your role as a commissioner, but they might tell you like, yeah, that's relevant. You can run with that. Same thing for council. When you get elected, talk to the staff, be like, hey, I'm really interested in this. What can I do to help? Most staff will be eager to give you a project to go and do. So next slide is kind of the why and how of regulating development. So why do you do it? Why do you have regulations? Because you want to do something. You want to accomplish something. It's that simple. What we often talk about in this space is, people have different perspectives on regulations. If you really ask people, they will say, I don't like being regulated. There's a phenomenon that you will see on the commission and at city council. I call it regulate thy neighbor. It's when somebody comes up and they are really mad that their neighbor is doing something. And they're like, you should do something about it. And then you ask them, okay, if you were doing the same thing, what would you have us do? Oh, I would have you leave me alone. That happens more often than you would think. There's also kind of a joke in the planning circles of, everybody is a libertarian until their neighbor does something they don't like. And then they instantly become socialists. It's very fun to watch. And so that's things you have to be aware of that can happen where, people kind of live in the now, and your job is to step back and understand the bigger picture of that. Why else do you do this? Reducing land use conflicts. That's probably the number one thing you're going to run into. You get a zoning change application, and it is changing something next to somebody's property. What usually happens? Even if it's a pretty reasonable request, there's good odds you will have people that will show up and they will be emotional. You might know why people are emotional about that? So what?
You're moving their cheese.
You're moving their cheese. Two, what's the biggest investment somebody makes in their lifetime? Their house. When you purchase a house, how many of you can really say that when you bought your house, it was a completely objective decision, devoid of emotion? It wasn't. It's an emotional attachment. That means when there is something that's perceived as a threat to your house, whether real or irrational, you're probably going to react. So that's things to keep in mind when you're having public comment. That's why I would tell you, like, one, have empathy. They're fired up because they're emotional about it. But two, be able to see through the emotion. It's being able to ask smart questions along the way on that. Why else do you do this? Making sure you have adequate public facilities. If you know that you have water pressure issues and somebody comes and proposes a 12-story building, I don't have to tell you how that's going to go. The top floor will see water in it one day when it rains. So keep that in mind, that those are important things to consider. And how do you promote quality of life community image? What do you want to convey? Are you a place to be proud of? One of the things that you'll hear me mention later in this conversation is the way you act as commission, the way you act as council directly affects how people feel about the community they live in. They want to be proud of their community. It doesn't mean you have to be fancy. One of my favorite cities I have worked for is a little town called Kilgore. Everybody know where Kilgore is? Out in East Texas. Lots of oil derricks in the middle of their downtown. Kilgore I would classify as pretty hard scrabble, but my goodness, are they proud. And they're very proud of their community. Being proud of your community has nothing to do with wealth or having every shiny object that you could ever have. It's really just the feeling of connectedness and being proud of how your city acts and responds to things. That's how Kilgore developed its pride. And they have a really cool junior college that has the first dance team in the country. I'm required to say that as a Texas State graduate. So how do you go about doing this? You draft ordinances. That can be a zoning subdivision or sometimes a unified code. I usually tell cities, if you know you need to fix both your subdivision regulations and your zoning ordinance, go ahead and just do a fully unified code and fix yourself for good, because otherwise they end up conflicting with each other all the time anyway, so something to think about. And then there's development agreements. These are usually related to economic development, annexations, certain types of development financing. If you've heard of a municipal utility district, something like that. Those are kind of what we call the eccentric ways to fund development. They're really risk reduction things for development, things like that. Big thing, should it be adversarial? Are developers bad? Anybody here think developers are bad? Oh, nobody's going to agree to raise their hand on that? Chickens. Somebody's thinking it. No, developers are not bad. I will also say it takes two to tango. Both parties have to be well-meaning in order for you to have a good relationship. Developers are shaped by how they've been treated in other communities. So what I'll tell you is talk to them, be comfortable around them, help them understand what the expectations are. If you live on platted property, it was created by a developer. There is not a single city in this country that was not created by a developer. So they've always played a role. It's understanding how to help them work for you and help you accomplish whatever goals you're wanting to accomplish as a community. You'll be surprised how developers react. Is basically, as long as their project math's good, intentional choice of words, they'll generally work with you on different ideas and concepts. It's the second where the math starts getting bad that they'll start to kind of balk. So just keep that in mind when you're asking for things, looking for concessions. Understand the math of what they're doing. They are in a business. They are not the Salvation Army. They'll be quick to remind you of that.
Okay.
So questions on that piece so far? There's also a nice little picture of Galveston, if you're interested.
Back on the zoning and unified codes, I don't really know what a unified code is.
Sure. So usually you have here's my subdivision ordinance, here's my zoning ordinance, here's my sign ordinance, here's my landscape ordinance, maybe here's my how to build public infrastructure ordinance, and they're all separate. What tends to happen is you will end up with conflicts between them, or it won't be clear how they interact, because usually on any particular project, it will touch all 5 of those at some point. Best practice is to actually look at, okay, if a project's going to touch all 5 of these, how do you blend them together and have them universally make sense? Have unified procedures that take you from the moment the developer has woken up at 3 in the morning with their idea to it is now constructed and a business is moving in. That's what a unified development code does, is it takes all that, packages it together, makes sure it all talks.
Okay, so in our city, we have different zones, and some zones you have to have a 25-foot setback, and some a 20, and some a 15. Would a unified code then be able to help us to make all of those, our setback law to be the same for all?
You could use it that way. You could actually do that in just your zoning ordinance too.
Okay, so you don't need a unified code for that.
Yeah, you don't need a unified code for that. That's just something that you can, kind of put forth an effort to do. And usually we encourage like consistency of setbacks. It helps you if anybody ever needs to change their zoning down the road so that their structure doesn't immediately become non-conforming. That's really frustrating when that happens, when you're like, you've got a really good idea and you need to tear off 5 feet of your building, sorry. That's the kind of stuff you want to watch for in your codes. So we encourage test your codes when you're updating them. Make sure you don't accidentally do something silly. That would be a something silly. But yeah, good question though.
Basically, what you were saying is you don't want to have 4 or 5 different codes that have to be met that don't coincide with one another, so it's a smooth process from the beginning.
Right.
Starting code to the last portion of the code that you use.
Exactly.
And that way you don't have to go back and redo everything so that you can get it to be that way.
Yeah.
Because the easier it is on the city, and trust me, I've been on city council before, and this is the first time I've been on a zoning commission, but it's something that has to happen. Because it makes it easier on you city council people, it just makes it easier on you all. And it makes it easier on whoever you're dealing with, if it's a developer or, whatever.
Yeah, we always talk about everybody benefits from a streamlined process.
Yeah.
Like, it's easier for the staff, it's easier for you as a council member or commissioner, and it's easier for the developer. For developers, time is money. So they think a lot about process efficiency. They will tolerate a lot of actually pretty draconian regulations if the process is really efficient. I've kind of seen it firsthand. I've worked in cities that were, I would say, wound a little tight on their regulations, but they had a good process. And so developers would come in, they would grumble, and be like, I don't want to do that. And they'd be like, but I'll be through this process in a month and a half, from concept to building permit? Yeah, I will gladly follow that regulation, please and thank you. So that's something to keep in mind. You'll see that with subdivision variances. One of the key state law changes that I'll mention is a subdivision plat can now be processed entirely administratively if a city wants to. And what cities are starting to do with that is they said, okay, yeah, we're going to go to that process. If it meets the code completely, it is administratively approved, it never sees a commission or council meeting. If it asks for just one deviation, it's off to the races, into the commission, into the city council. That makes developers think twice about what they're asking for. So that's been a really interesting practice that's emerged following that. It's much harder for smaller cities where you don't have just gobs and gobs of professional staff laying around, but it's something to keep in mind on that. This next one, here is your legal basis for what you do in Texas. Basically, a lot of your stuff comes from police powers, but there's certain state laws that are useful to know. You don't need to go read them. I would not wish reading local government code on my worst enemy. It is very boring. It is written by a lot of lawyers, and they use all of the words. It's hard to read. So are you guys lawyers, by the way? I want to make sure I'm not completely insulting anybody here.
We all are.
You all are? That's not good. I'm going to leave now. No. Your zoning authority. Say what? Yeah, exactly. Paid by the word. Sometimes we say that it has a thud factor. That's how you determine the price. How loud is the thud when it hits the ground? So you have your zoning authority. That's chapter 211. That's where you find all kinds of useful tidbits in there. Subdivision authority is chapter 212. This chapter had a lot of activity last session. It was actually the most significant reform to subdivision regulations probably in 3 or 4 decades in Texas. It was intense. There's actually parts of it that I got to write, which was fun. I got to write some bills. Cool. They didn't keep all of it, and then they amended it, and it was really annoying. There's comprehensive planning authority under Chapter 213. This is what says, yes, cities, you can do a comprehensive plan, because believe it or not, there were general law cities that said, the state law doesn't say that we can do a comprehensive plan. And the legislature was kind of like, you can, it's under your police powers, but sure, here's a chapter just for you, so you feel good about it. So you've got that in there. And there's a bunch of other state laws that are just useful to be aware of. Chapter 42 is extraterritorial jurisdiction. That's in that chapter until it eventually ceases to exist. I did not say that out loud. I was just kidding. Not really. That's been a pattern going on with the legislature as well. Chapter 43 is annexation. Short version, you can't really do it. Good luck. It's only voluntary, except for very select circumstances. 214, that's where you find your authority to do building codes, things like that. 215, that's your regulation of businesses and occupations. Basically, that's where you find what you can do for payday lenders, pawn shops, stuff like that. There's Chapter 216, regulation of signs, which can include the ETJ. I'm taking bets right now on when your ETJ authority for that will go away, because it's a First Amendment regulation, which makes it kind of already prone to being targeted. And generally speaking, you as a council or commission probably don't care all that much what the ETJ has to say because they don't vote or pay taxes. So being very blunt about that. Chapter 217, that's your nuisance regulations, what it says, where it says cities, you can do this. Chapter 243, SOBs, as we so often like to call them, sexually oriented businesses, best acronym in the entirety of state law. You do have the ability to regulate those. You cannot prohibit them in your city. You have to have a way to do it somehow, but you can regulate the snookies out of it. So most cities have taken that approach. Chapter 245 is vested rights. This is what you sometimes will hear called colloquially grandfathering. I would encourage you to look up the origin of that word, and then please don't use it anymore. It's not a great word. But it's vested rights. That basically says that you can't change the rules in the middle of the game. Again, things that you shouldn't have to say in state law, but I guess you have to, because some cities were actually doing that, where they would say, yeah, you've had your application in, but we actually changed this ordinance while you were here. Now you have to comply with this. Oh, your project doesn't work. Good luck. Bye. That's not good. Don't do that. And then this last one, randomly from Texas Water Code. Anybody got to guess what this is? It's a very exciting topic. You have a lake here, right? Chapter 16 is regulation of water resources. This is where you find laws about how you cannot flood your neighbor. It's not nice and it's illegal. So that's actually the origin of drainage regulations in Texas, is under that particular chapter. So this is just kind of a sampling, so you know kind of where does all this come from? What does it mean? Things like that. All right, next one. Where can you go wrong? So I would be remiss if I said that some councils, some commissions don't always behave themselves, and they can occasionally end up in a dark, sad place. Where's the dark, sad place? It's a courthouse. Big things is understanding the difference between legislative acts and ministerial acts. If you have a plat that comes before you and it meets your code, but you don't like it, do you get to say no? You do not. What happens if you do say no? You get sued. You know what's really quirky about that? You can get sued personally. That's exciting. So if it meets code, it must be approved. Keep that in mind. It can also be really unfortunate if it's something that required a public hearing, because this means the public has now come out and they are screaming and yelling they don't want this, and you get to smile and say, cool story, we have to approve it. Okay, thanks, bye. It's one of those provisions of state law where I think it was probably well-meaning, and it actually kind of erodes trust in government. Or maybe that was the intent. I don't know. Arbitrary and capricious decisions. This is, I am denying your project because the brick is the wrong shade of red. Real story. There's a city that got sued for that. It was Bee Cave. But that's where you're making decisions where there's no real basis for it. You're just kind of, because you don't like the project, you're cooking it. Ultra-vires, that is regulating beyond your authority. This is where, cities just start stepping into all kinds of funny things. Y'all familiar with fracking in Texas and injection wells, things like that? So it turns out that, oil formations and things like that, natural gas formations, they don't care that there's a city on top of them. In turn, that means that folks that want to access said minerals don't particularly care that there's a city on top of that either. And they want to place their wells where it's ideally can be for extraction. That sometimes means next to a neighborhood. Cities started regulating that. And that can be okay until you start regulating what they call down the hole. When you start regulating how it's extracted. And that's the moment where you get crosswise with the Texas Railroad Commission. And then they will inform you in no uncertain terms that you should stop doing that. And then you'll say, but it's our police power. And then you will get sued. And then you will lose. Didn't. So that's an example of where you can actually overstep, and the state law actually came in and clarified, said, dear local governments, in case you didn't catch it before, please don't do this. Okay, thanks. Takings. What I will tell you is that you can regulate things so that somebody cannot do what they want. There's nothing wrong with that. You cannot regulate something to the point where they can't do anything reasonable. That's where you can get in trouble. That's the kind of the basics of takings. Successful takings cases are very rare. So you'll hear that term thrown around a lot. This was a taking because somebody saw that word on some random sheet of paper and didn't actually read what it was about. But they're like, it was a taking. They aren't letting me, do X, Y, or Z. They can still do other stuff, right? So it's not a taking. They just can't do exactly what they want. Procedural due process. This is where cities get in trouble the most. Is errors in notice, denial of hearing, Open Meetings Act violations, incredibly common. Incredibly common still 30 years after the passage of that law. It really baffles me. Conflicts of interest. Conflict of interest lawsuits are less common, but they can happen. But your due process stuff is usually, the most common example of it is where something gets denied and they don't have a recourse. Then there's no appeal process. A city that got in trouble for that actually had a process where a specific use permit could be revoked by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and they had no established process for what happened if it was revoked and the applicant disagreed. And they got to make a trip to the courthouse. And it was actually a very fast lawsuit. It was a summary judgment. The judge looked at it and said, yep, you violated due process. Please go fix that. Award to plaintiff, bye. And the city really didn't fight it. They knew what they were in for. Vested rights, you do see those on occasion. Those are very interesting lawsuits usually because they're usually dealing with very esoteric things of what constitutes the beginning of a project. Has it been a continuous project? And therefore you couldn't change the rules. The best examples of that are in San Antonio. San Antonio adopted tree regulations and also aquifer protections, also in Austin. And that's where you see the vested rights stuff play out the most, is when did a project begin? Did it begin on this last application, or did it begin in 1972 when Bob sketched out something on a napkin and showed it to a council member? That sort of thing. So those are things to watch for. Manufactured housing, you can't completely prohibit it in your city. And then protected uses, religious institutions, things like that. You just have to be cautious when you're working around uses that are often protected. Think about things that show up in the Constitution. You're probably going to just have to have a little bit of heightened awareness. There's a really famous lawsuit, Supreme Court case from Bernie. where Bernie was enforcing its historic preservation regulations on the Catholic Archdiocese. The Catholic Archdiocese said, you're actually keeping us from performing our function as a religious thing. And you'll hear sometimes a term in judicial circles called strict scrutiny. What that means is that there are certain things that are so enshrined that if you're going to regulate it, you better have a dang good reason. Bernie was not able to come up with the dang good reason for that. So that's why you see the Religious Land Use Institutions Protection Act and things like that that are now in place. So very exciting stuff. Any questions? I'm happy to see, I can still see eyeballs on everybody. It's really great. Your types of decisions, you have advisory recommendations as a commission. That's where you're usually saying like, hey, capital projects, we should do this. If you're putting together action plans, strategic plan input, your Planning and Zoning Commission is one of your best sources for that as council. There's actually a reason why your Planning and Zoning Commission is often referred to as, kind of the minor leagues of your city council. That's where you tend to source your council members from the most, is there, because they touch some of the most controversial stuff. They learn it. And then they decide, I like this so much, I want to be even less popular and run for election. See, I'm glad to see y'all can smile at yourselves and laugh. It's good. You have legislative acts. That's a zoning change or amending your zoning ordinance. It's adopting a plan or undergoing the process of planning, adopting any other ordinance. Then you have ministerial acts. This is where to explain it, it's like, legislative, there's debate. Ministerial means you're overseeing something. You're overseeing these actions. You're overseeing subdivision approvals. If it meets the code, it shall go forward. For y'all, site plans go through the Planning and Zoning Commission here. And that's something that would also fall into ministerial. If it meets the code, then it's approved. If you deviate from that, you're probably wandering into arbitrary and capricious territory and you're going to have a bad time. Site plan approvals in the Planning and Zoning Commission are kind of unusual, not a particularly common practice. Then you've got your judicial acts. Those don't typically appear with your Planning and Zoning Commission or City Council. They're usually going to a zoning board of adjustment that hears variances. And if somebody doesn't like what happens there, it goes to district court. Really fun. What that means, and I've seen this happen, is that a variance could be denied at the zoning board of adjustment, but the city council actually wanted that project to go forward. But there wasn't any understanding of expectations between everybody. And it results in the city council and the city actually suing their own zoning board of adjustment. It's very entertaining. Judges have a good time with it. It goes quickly, it sails through, but it's still really funny to see, city of blah, blah, blah versus city of blah, blah, blah zoning board of adjustment.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but the council is the Board of Adjustments for Morgan's Point, correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So
Yeah, and y'all do have.
sue ourselves.
Yeah, y'all do have the language in your regulations that establishes zoning board of adjustment, but what y'all probably do is you probably appoint your council.
Okay, so now I'm confused. So I know we don't have the zoning board of adjustments. So it goes to council, council says yes, zoning board of adjustment says yes, it goes to P and Z, and then we say yes, and then it goes back to council. That seems redundant and dumb.
Yeah, and I don't know how y'all's variances process here. If they,
We don't
Goes
use
to you
the,
guys first.
right, but if it's, is it supposed to go to the board of adjustments? What am I missing? I'm missing something.
yeah, usually a variance goes straight to the board of adjustment. If you're in a situation where your council is acting at the zoning board of adjustment, sometimes they set it where the P and Z is a recommending body for it.
Oh, I thought we were about to get rid of all
No.
variances. I was super excited.
No, what we did is
Oh,
we
no.
sent it through the P and Z to get the recommendation to council, and we did the public hearing for both so that it would pass all the mustard.
Is that in our ordinances under appendix B?
I don't think so.
So that needs,
Yeah, that's an open, we need some paperwork on that. Yep.
Very fun stuff. Yeah, that was one thing I didn't look at to see.
Put it
like,
down on the list.
is to see if y'all actually had an appointed one. Like, it exists in your regulations, but I wasn't sure if they all just like said, it's the council.
And I actually think in seeing it, it actually references as in state law defines, if one is not appointed by the council will serve as.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I learned that in home rule. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the key changes that happens is you have to have an independent one under home rule. Yeah, those zoning board of adjustment things are really fun to be on too. You get to say no a lot, which is, that's kind of your jam. It sure is fun because generally speaking, variance criteria, it's tough to beat them. You've got to have a pretty good process. And I usually say, like, if you're finding yourself granting the same variance over and over, please go fix your code. It means something's broken. Doesn't mean deny the variance and then go fix it. It means like, okay, this thing's fine. We're going to grant the variance. Staff, let's start drafting something. Commission responsibilities, it's developing and updating your comp plan. You've already figured that part out. Implementing recommendations from that plan. That's where I would suggest y'all putting together an annual action plan of here's what we think we should tackle. I always tell you, be realistic. Don't overdo it. Y'all are volunteers. You'll have lives outside of this, I hope. Monitor development regulations. Make sure that you're updating when needed. Recommend approval of zoning changes. Those are your big things. Approve subdivisions. Got your legislative acts for zoning and planning, ministerial, quasi-judicial if you get variances coming through there. But there's still more. There's capital improvements program. If that's something that y'all actually undertake here, some small towns don't do that.
It's close.
Yeah, we haven't officially started that whole thing. We've started the process of getting a plan put together.
Yeah, the first one is always the hardest. Like, once you create it, it gets easier. But the act of creating it the first time, unpleasant. Yes?
Let me go back to this ministerial acts.
Mhm.
Subdivision approval, Morgan's Point Resort is unusual, the commission, I think.
That is actually something that's unusual about y'all. In most cities, like the way state law reads is you establish that a commission or a city council approves your subdivision plats. It's an or statement. Y'all's is actually written correctly. You're able to do it this way because it specifically states the Planning and Zoning Commission is a recommending body on it. There's a whole lot of cities that had regulations that were written that said that the Planning and Zoning Commission must approve it and then the city council must approve it. That's two approval bodies, not allowed under state law. So you just have to make sure that your process is established where if the Planning and Zoning Commission says, no, we're denying this, that it still has a pathway to council. There's also a lot of cities that are set up, which is something I encourage under due process, is that if your Planning and Zoning Commission, if they are the approval body, and they can't approve it and that's the end, that if they vote to deny one, that denial triggers an automatic appeal to city council. Any guesses why? They have to have recourse. What's the other reason? Bingo. Because if you're about to get sued, I'm going to take a hazardous guess that your city council might like to know about it. Just call me crazy. So that's actually a big reason to have that automatic appeal is it could head off a potential issue because that gives your city attorney a time to spot it and say like, oh, we've got an issue. Get the executive session for council where they can brief them on here's the legal obligation and city council can maybe avert a problem. Or if there's a valid reason to deny it where it's like, yeah, it didn't meet XYZ of code, then it's like, it goes to city council and the applicant gets to embarrass themselves twice, which I personally like. Because if you can't get a plat right, Lord help you, as an engineer, you need to be able to get those correct. But yeah, y'all are a little bit unusual. Most cities have established P&Z as the approval with maybe an appeal going up. Something to think about. If you like how this is working, if it's working for you, don't worry about it. Y'all probably don't see a ton of plat activity, I'm guessing. Y'all are built out. If you see a plat here, it's probably, if you see a plat here, it's probably, somebody moving a lot line or something like that, which are usually amending plats and pretty big snooze fests anyway. Yeah, I know I looked at the map. I didn't see a lot of land that hadn't been built on yet, so. Which I'll probably get out getting like I'd like to do something else with my land now. And everybody gets very excited about that, I'm sure. So on this, wait, there's more. There's also CIP, economic development activities. Sometimes in smaller cities, the P&Z kind of holds that function. I did not look to see if y'all have a separate economic development corporation. Do y'all? I see head nods, so I'm guessing yes. You encourage and monitor the visual image through urban design. This is thinking about what you want your community to look like. It might mean recommending actions by the city. Maybe it's a wayfinding program. Maybe it's gateway signs. Maybe it's other things that can help create identity for your community. Have that annual work program, and then a lot of times what we encourage y'all is once a year, have staff update you on what's the latest demographic information for your city. It gets usually you get your population estimates updated each year. I don't know if y'all get picked up in the CRS program or not, or not CRS, the annual survey, the 3 to 5 year. ACS, thank you. Brain fart, sorry. The ACS survey, if y'all get picked up in that, that means every few years you get some really good updated info about your community. Has a different margin of error, but it's still useful. But it can kind of tell you what's going on. Big thing, commission does the heavy lifting for council. That's how it should work and function. Make sure there's clear expectations between everybody. And big thing too is, as council, be nice to your commission. Y'all are both equally badly compensated. Like, let's not forget that. But the commissions are strictly voluntary. I do see cities where they're kind of abusive to their commission, and it's not nice, and it results in resignations and stuff. And it also tends to result in people running against you later. I've also seen that many times successfully, and where they ran on, this guy was a jerk. I'm running against him because he's a jerk, and they won. Like, they had no other real platform. It was pretty entertaining. So that can happen. So things to keep in mind. All right, your application types. Y'all are getting an updated comprehensive plan. It will have a future land use map. It may not happen here, but inevitably in faster growing cities, you will have that future land use map adopted, and 3 months later, somebody will come in with something different. Sometimes it's a good idea, sometimes it's a lousy idea. So you might process a comprehensive plan amendment. Or if you have a thoroughfare plan, you might have to adjust an alignment, that kind of thing. Should be pretty rare. If they're happening a lot, update your plan. It means something's wrong. Zoning changes, you'll get map amendments. That is a zoning change changing Bob's property from, I don't know, R1 to C1, or whatever your terminology is. You'll get text amendments where sometimes it's by staff, or we've identified this problem in code, we'd like to amend the code. You can also have developers submit text amendments. Not very common, but it does happen from time to time. You might see specific use permits. Those are where a use might or might not be okay depending on its circumstances. What's next door to, things like that. You'll also see variations on this. You might see a planned unit development. That's kind of like writing a little custom zoning code for a piece of property. That's my best way to explain it. Probably not very common here, I wouldn't think. You'll get your subdivision plats, and you'll get your site plan approvals. You probably have all seen most of these now at some point. Maybe. I just threw a few examples of here's what they look like. Your plats here are probably going to be small. They're going to be a handful of lots. Your site plans, probably pretty straightforward. It'll be, the barbecue restaurant needs to add on another smokehouse because they got written up in Texas Monthly. May we all be so lucky. That type of thing. Zoning changes maybe, that type of thing. Any other weird application types that y'all get? Say what? Short-term rentals. Yes, those are a joy. So y'all require each one to get a permit and go through the commission? Y'all have a lot of those here?
16? What is the number?
Somebody actually brought up some neighbors that had houses where people were in and out over the weekends and things along those lines, which triggered our city manager to look into how many of these do we have. And, we looked into it, there were several that were out there. So planning and zoning and city council both established some regulations for those VRBOs or short-term weekend rentals so that we could monitor them, keep.
Tax them.
Yeah,
Hotel tax, and that just
tax
got
'em.
changed too. Bell County Commissioners Court last 2 weeks ago, the hotel tax is just now coming to us, right?
Yes.
Did I understand that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's
After we sign.
been a process.
Yeah, short-term rentals are a fun thing. I'm in San Marcos. We've had very interesting issues with short-term rentals. Our big issue there was fraternities renting them for party houses. Pretty intense. So they've had that issue. New Braunfels has dealt with them for a long time. They're probably one of the more sophisticated cities on it. There's also cities that have been eaten by them. Fredericksburg has been eaten by short-term rentals. By and large, there's neighborhoods in Fredericksburg that are 75% short-term rentals now. Pretty wild. They've adopted regulations now, but it's kind of a case of like, I should have done that about 5 or 6 years ago. It's been tough. So you got your various, oh, go ahead.
Didn't the Airbnb rule change on the party rentals? Didn't that cut down on a lot of it?
Yeah, that cut down on a lot of it. San Marcos actually has a very strict short-term rental regulation. Involves like number of units that can be owned by a single entity. There's different zoning districts. It has to be actually owner on site. That's how they resolved the party house issue in San Marcos, was owner on site. Those are the kind of the two common methods I've seen for that. Probably not an issue y'all have as much here. It was a big issue in San Marcos.
I think that we
There was a house that was quite literally destroyed.
zoning, we have a regulation for that, don't we? I mean, I thought, looking through the application process, it's pretty well defined for no parties and, where the cars can be parked and all those kind of things, so.
Yeah, usually you're dealing with stuff like parking and making sure they pay their hotel occupancy tax. I'm going to skip kind of the next one and jump to conducting a meeting. This is kind of just some useful stuff. I'm not going to go through this in great detail. One, because you've already been here for a hot minute and y'all are volunteers. I don't forget that. But it's understanding your rules of procedure. You may have separately adopted rules of procedure. I couldn't find them on your website, so you may not. That means you probably default to Robert's Rules of Order. Robert's Rules of Order was generally written for large organizations, and it was written by a military general. It shows. But there are versions of it that are easier to work with. The newly revised version works pretty well. There's also adapted versions. You'll see one mentioned here, Rosenberg's Rules of Order. So what?
We have,
Yeah.
we have the video, heard Rosenberg talking on a video.
Oh, yeah. Rosenberg's Rules of Order is fun. This is where I tell people, I know we're Texas and we're supposed to hate California, but not everything from California is bad. They make very good wine and very good abridged versions of Robert's Rules of Order. But make sure that you're communicating the rules to everybody that's attending the meeting. Also, don't overthink it. I've watched chairs where they're like, well, it should be this or this or this. Don't kvetch over it. Like, you can, make a call. If you're wrong, nobody dies. Nobody has died because of a Robert's Rules of Order infraction, I promise. You do your best. There's Texas Open Meetings Act, of course. You do have to allow public testimony. That was a change in 2019. Basically means you have to have general public comment, and it has to be before items are being acted on. You can't stick it at the end of the meeting. That's not nice. So just keep that in mind. It can be restricted to only items on the agenda. So if you're having a problem with, say, people showing up at your meetings and singing songs with their guitar, Austin, you can adopt rules for that. How to conduct a public hearing. Y'all are probably kind of new to that too. So what I've kind of lined out here is, how do you conduct one of these public hearings in a way that is reasonable and efficient and doesn't make you want to scream? So generally speaking, like, some cities will set this up where they've got a public hearing time and then they've got the agenda item. I try to discourage cities from doing that. put it together as one item. Don't immediately do the public hearing. Do some presentations first, because otherwise, what are you going to get? First person that comes up to talk, they say, I have no idea what this is about. I'm against it. Well, or they ask something that is actually probably in a presentation by either city staff or the applicant. So what we say is have the applicant present their case first, have the staff make the presentation after that. Go ahead and let the commission and staff ask some questions, at that point, because there's very good odds that you have the same questions the public does. And then only at that point, then go ahead and open the public hearing and hear from the public. Because what you might have just done is you might have just answered questions for them, and you may have changed the nature of the comment, where they're not coming up and saying, y'all are up to something up here. They've actually already seen you ask intelligent questions, hopefully, and they may have been able to answer some of their own questions where they feel more comfortable about what they know, where they can say confidently, I am for or against whatever it is, or maybe they change their mind. But at a minimum, it'll make your public comment period a lot shorter, because there's good odds that somebody comes up and they say, I'm up here, I'm speaking, and I'm against this this particular thing, and it's for the same reasons I heard Commissioner Strawn say earlier. Instead of it being a 3-minute public comment, it just became 30 seconds. You gained yourself 2.5 minutes. Congratulations. So we encourage things like that. It actually makes it easier on the public too, because most people are not comfortable talking in a public meeting. And for a lot of people, it's also, a lot of times those hearings are their first time interacting with local government, other than getting a traffic ticket, which doesn't count. At least I say it doesn't count, and that's what I told the judge. The Iowa lead foot, I will readily admit it. So at that point, you open the public hearing. Best practice, have the members of the public fill out a form. Main reason for that is your city clerk does not like deciphering unusual last names. It's very hard. And it also allows you to capture all the information you need. Make sure everybody gets an opportunity to speak. There's really no good reason to not. I've watched the city of Austin have a 20-hour public hearing. Sometimes that's what happens. It's unfortunate. Establish time limits if necessary. Establish rules for decorum. Big thing here, avoid clapping, jeering, and egging on. Nothing good comes from that in a public hearing. It gets worse and worse, and it tends to cause the comments to get more and more emotional, more and more pointed. So try to keep that in check. Don't be a jerk about it, but keep it in check. Establish what's the relationship of the speaker to whatever the project is. Why do they care, basically? And then bottom line up front. I'm a big fan of this term, bluff. Encourage them to start with, I'm speaking for or against or neutrally on whatever. So a lot of times what we'll actually have is like on the podium, a script for them to start their comment. My name is so-and-so. I live at so-and-so, which is whatever from this place. And I am speaking for, against, blah, blah, blah. Here are my comments. It makes it really easy for the commission to follow.
Like that.
It also tends to cool people off. Determine what evidence they're giving you and whether it has credence. I generally say is that the second that you hear the public comment refer to those people, probably not a legitimate public comment. I wouldn't worry too much about it. If they're presenting things that are factual, that's probably pretty useful. If it is screaming and yelling or saying things like child molesters are going to move in there, there's good odds that there's some hyperbole there. Make sure you're paying attention to it. And comments must be addressed to the chair and commission. One of the things that you'll see happen is somebody will be speaking at that podium and they will turn around and they will start talking to the applicant. Maybe they'll start pointing at the applicant, maybe with a particular finger, and it just goes south real quick. They're supposed to be addressing their comments to the chair. Usually people understand kind of the purpose of that. They're like, they get it, but some people don't, and they can be unfriendly. Then you close the hearing. At that point, the public should be quiet. This is now the time for the commission to do their thing. Be mindful of the evidence. Don't indicate your leanings until after the hearing is closed. That's something I try to encourage. It's hard to do, to not, let loose what you're already thinking. And then applicants should be given the opportunity to rebut comments. That's important. It shouldn't just be like applicant makes their presentation, here's this, here's the beat down from the public, and that's it. You don't get to say anything else, applicant. When it could be that somebody said something that was just factually wrong about the project, and they should be able to correct that. So they should be efficient about it too. Like usually tell them like, please briefly respond to any public comments, briefly. And then when they start rambling, be like, okay, let's move on. Commission motions should cite findings and the reasons for decisions when appropriate. Subdivision denials have to have specific code-based deficiencies. Like you should literally quote chapter and verse or cite something. Hopefully your staff has provided you, hey, it's deficient on this. Same holds true for site plans. Any variances should cite, why you're denying it. Conversely, if you're recommending approval of the variance, you're actually saying, we find that it meets these criteria, therefore we approve. It's very useful to link direct comprehensive plan language. This is where it's important to know what your plan says and where it says it. One of the best things is being able to say, yeah, on our comprehensive plan on page whatever, it says we want this kind of development. You're doing that. We recommend approval. That sort of thing. You have different types of approvals. One, you got to have a quorum. You can't just have two people show up and do their thing. Not allowed. But some things are a majority, some things are supermajority. Your majority votes are generally like anything that doesn't have a major protest. A supermajority can be triggered at the commission level if you have 20% of the land area that is, when it was notified of the zoning change, if 20% of that land area is protesting it, it can trigger a supermajority, meaning usually 6 of 7 if you've got a 7-member commission. A supermajority can also sometimes be triggered at council if the commission has recommended denial and the city council wants to overrule that. It sometimes requires a supermajority. That varies by city. I did not check to see how y'all work, but that is something that is a common provision. It actually often is enshrined in a city charter.
I have not checked that either. Thank you.
Nobody would have known, man. You could have owned that later. So parliamentary rules.
Can you find a supermajority on
So what?
a 5-member board?
So if it's a 5-member board and it takes a supermajority, that means 4 of 5.
4 of the 5?
Yeah. 4 of 5.
I know it's unanimous, but
There is
Yeah, it's
one more than half. That's,
generally one more than half. You have to have at least a 2/3 or 75%. It depends on which board it is, but
I think
it's
council,
usually 2/3.
yeah, we're 4. We're 4
Yeah.
of 5.
Yeah, usually if you're a 5-member, it's going to be 4 of 5.
If you have 7 on a board, then it would have to be 5.
Yeah. 5, what is 6? But just something to be aware of. State law is pretty prescriptive on it, so if it pops up, usually your city attorney will say something. Again, your parliamentary rules, your role of chair, open and close the meeting, keeps order, introduces the items, recognizes who can speak, rules on matters and procedures. Big thing for the chair is just making sure that it is organized, that people get to speak in an efficient manner. There's some good stuff in Robert's rules about how to do that efficiently. That's worth knowing. When you get into motions is where it gets really fun because there's a million types of motions. That's where I would tell you, maybe keep this part of the presentation handy because it can tell you how to make your motions. Because there's main motions and then there's subsidiary motions. And that's where it gets exciting. So generally what you'll see in most cities is that it'll actually, the conversation will begin with a motion. There'll be a motion to approve, second, and then commission chair says, okay, floor open for debate. General rule is that whoever made the motion, that's who the chair turns to first to make their case. And then you have an opportunity for everybody to speak. It might be that, 2 of them don't really care to speak. It's not unusual. And a second is required for any motion to proceed. And then you'll have discussion on the motion plus any subsidiary motions. I'm giving you an example of what a motion might look like. I move to approve, yada, yada, yada. And then there are exceptions on the requirement for a second. Those are a point of information, not real common, or a point of order, slightly more common, but still not very common. Your points of order is like if something's just going like wildly out of, off the rails. Usually it means like the chair kind of lost control. That's usually where your point of order comes from. Your other, I do have the public hearing process in here. Make sure I've got this in the right order. I think I may have repeated this. Yeah, you've got, order of debate is in this under public hearings. And then you can have motions to extend debate. You can limit debate. You can have processes for how long do we talk about something before we vote. That type of thing. Big thing with public hearings is don't interact with the public. Don't get into a debate with somebody that is speaking at the podium. One, nobody looks smart at the end of that. Usually goes badly. And two, it can jeopardize the integrity of your hearings. It's supposed to be time for the public to speak, not you, so to speak. And then, what happens if the applicant doesn't show up? I had a pretty hard and fast, it's probably like my one jerk rule as a planning director, which is if you did not show up, your job was to present the burden of proof for whatever your project was. If you did not show up, my recommendation automatically became a denial. And it was a denial on the basis of failure to provide the burden of proof by the applicant. Fully defensible. Applicants did not like that. Guess what, though? They showed up after that. And then they usually called me choice words to the commission. The commission's like, we set aside our time. Why didn't you? You get paid to be here. And then it would devolve, and then their project would get denied anyway, and I would laugh. You do have processes for debate. It must be recognized by the chair. Do you have any specific debate procedure? Wouldn't be bad to get one. You see a picture here from an actual meeting. The important thing about debate is to remember you're in the United States and not England. This is not prime minister's questions where you just yell at each other from across the room. Very entertaining on C-SPAN, like I am there for it. But when you're actually experiencing it in real life, not so fun. So basically make sure, keep your cool, that type of thing as you're going through that. Debates are congenial. They're friendly. Remember that these are people that you will go and have a slice of pizza with after the meeting. Or maybe not. Maybe you have to wait a day to cool off, but you're still friends and neighbors. So just keep that in mind that everybody's coming here, that everybody's here to serve the public. So keep that in mind. Amendments. Who here has heard the term friendly amendment before? Yeah, friendly amendments don't exist. I'm sorry to inform you. A lot of cities practice this, and then they are shocked when they find out it is nowhere in Robert's Rules of Order. And they're like, wait, what, why? So you can ask, agree to adjust a motion if everybody universally consents, where you could vote to adjust it, as the case may be. So generally what you'll happen is you have that first main motion, and then you'll have motion to amend the motion, where people want to add some conditions or something, or a nuance to it. The way you vote on motions is you vote for the last subsidiary one first. You kind of do it backwards, working up to the main motion, because that tells you what is the resulting motion, what has been built here. Be kind in how you do this, because somewhere there is a city clerk that if you put 16 different subsidiary motions, they are just going to start crying. Don't do that. Keep it simple. There's also substitute motions where you can submit an alternative motion, that kind of thing. And then you can have motion to amend or motion to substitute. You can have motions to amend the substitution. This is where I say, again, please be kind on this and work with each other. If you see it's getting messy, if you made the original motion, you can say, hey, can I try to restate a motion and offer your own substitute based on what you've heard? That can sometimes help clear it up. Other motion, point of order. That's basically, you're doing something wrong, chair sustains it or denies it, rare. Motion to continue or motion to table. Who here has heard tabling motions a lot? What do you think a tabling motion does? Like, it just delays it till the next
not what
meeting
I
or
thought.
something?
Takes it off the agenda.
Yeah, it basically removes it from the agenda. It goes away. It vaporizes, So usually what you're looking for is motion to continue, and you'll usually state a particular future meeting, or I've even seen it done where it's motion to continue when the applicant has resolved X, Y, and Z, which sometimes turns into an effective tabling, where they can actually say that, motion to continue, if the applicant doesn't resolve it by this time, it's a motion to table indefinitely, and off it goes. You can motion to commit. That's where you can refer something to staff. A really common example of that is on contracts with council, where they say, yes, we approve selection of this firm to do whatever, and authorize the city manager to negotiate and execute an agreement. That's a motion to commit. Calling the question. This is where things have gone on forever, and there's like, if you're the council, it's a 7-member council, 6 of you are in agreement, you've got one person that's carrying on, and you've basically had it. And you say, you know what, move the previous question, and the chair then has the opportunity to recognize that motion, call for a second. If it receives a second, there's no debate, not another word is spoken. At that point, you call a vote, and it's an aye or no. And if it's 2/3, you just end a debate. Your next action is to vote on motions. And it becomes a regimented military activity until you reach the end of the motions you have to deal with. Handy to have if you do have a grandstander, but should be rare. If you see it happening sometimes, that's where you maybe pull them aside and be like, hey, I'd like to go home. I'm missing the Spurs game. Or am I far enough north where it has to be a Mavericks game? I'm not sure. But keeping that in mind. Also, motion to adjourn is not required if you reach the end of the agenda. Fun fact. At that point, you've reached the end of the agenda. You as the chair say, we've reached the end of the agenda, meeting is adjourned. And then you go jet out.
We don't have,
So, fun stuff.
I'm ready to.
There are motions to reconsider. Has to be made by somebody on the prevailing side of a motion. In other words, you have to have convinced somebody. Yes, you've got a
I have a
question.
question about motion to table.
Yeah.
It confuses me with postponing. So we had a presentation in council to do a improvement to a park or to change some things in the park. And there was a lot of talk for and against it from the public. And then we decided that we were also setting up a Parks and Rec department. And we decided we should just postpone it and let Parks and Rec look into this at a later date, and they could come with their recommendations. So should we have tabled that, or should we have postponed it, or should we have, I don't know.
That's probably an appropriate tabling, because you
okay.
don't actually have any clue of when it would come back.
Right,
That's where you can say, yeah, we're tabling this. Usually I would say you make the motion to table with some explanation of what should happen next,
okay.
and that'll help clear it up. I'll just knock that over.
I think that's what we did.
That's what we did, yeah.
So congratulations, you pulled off a rare correct tabling. Gold star.
It's a miracle.
Yeah, so you do have motions to reconsider. The way those work is you have a vote for, first, are we willing to reconsider it? And if you say yes to that, if you vote and say yes to that, then you get to make a motion on a new action. I have seen motions to reconsider in my career, like one hand. Very, very rare. Because usually nobody on the prevailing side is going to suddenly have a crisis of conscience. If they do, you might have an open meetings question, because you have to ask yourself, are they texting each other on the dais? Do they just create a walking quorum by phone? That sort of thing. And so you have to get somebody on the prevailing side to change their mind. You have to convince a majority that this should be thought about again. It's a pretty big hill to climb. You also have a motion to rescind. That's where you can change something earlier in the meeting. I have never seen a motion to rescind. I'm guessing I probably never will. It's rare. Motion to suspend rules. I've never really seen this happen either. It just kind of seems to happen naturally when it gets to. That's where sometimes there's chair discretion on time limits. A good example of that is, maybe there's a proclamation and somebody wants to get up and say something. A good example often is like a Veterans Day proclamation. And somebody wants to get up and speak, and it's a Gold Star wife. I probably don't have to tell you that if a Gold Star wife is getting up to speak at a podium, you best not gavel her down. That's a poor choice. So it's, thinking logically about things like that, or if somebody, use the chair, think, hey, they're rolling on something that we think is important. You hit that 3 minutes and you kind of just like let it roll. Maybe your city clerk says like, hey, it's been 3 minutes, and you're like, that's nice. You can let it roll.
I think that's what we do,
Yeah, most
rather than having an action motion.
most small towns.
It says.
Yeah, well, like usually, like you'll hear like the buzzer go off, and usually at that point, the chair or the mayor will say, ma'am, please continue, or sir, please continue.
But you don't have to say motion to suspend the rules. You can just let the
No,
person
there's
go
an
on.
element
So by
of chair
default,
discretion.
yeah, you can
I
say
think
it. I
that
would
the
think.
chair is
And the
one
chair can
who's-
say like, you can continue. Now,
Generally-
theoretically, somebody could call a point of order and be like, no, I don't want to hear from this guy anymore.
Yeah, so if the chair said, go ahead, and the council said, point of order, and, because we didn't want to hear him anymore, then it would take two-thirds majority to overrule the chair, right?
Yeah. And then it becomes a battle royale, and it's great. We put up an octagon, there's a chain link fence, there's no gloves, it gets violent. No, I'm just kidding. But those are the types of things you'll see where you have got some discretion. Rarely have I seen that type of stuff be necessary in a small town environment. Mainly because you all see each other at the grocery store, you're not going to be jerks to each other.
Right.
Details, yes.
But we have a Dollar General.
Yeah. I have listed out some things that can cause your liability. I've already kind of touched on some of these. The how can you be sued, can you be sued? The last one is potential liability on conflicts of interest. You got this beat into you already, but there's some nice little graphics about what constitutes a relationship. There's family member, family relationship. They are addressed differently under state law. Basically, you kind of want to know that whole chapter 171 to like 176 of local government code that all deals with conflicts of interest. Biggest thing I tell folks is smell test. Does it smell bad if you are actively participating in something? If you think it might look bad, it does look bad. It's a little adage like, are you okay with grandma reading about this in the paper? It's a good metric. And lean into your city attorney for advice. You get the agenda, you see something on there, or you usually know something's coming up. Reach out to the city attorney and be like, hey, this project's coming up. This is my relationship to it. What should I do? The city attorney will tell you like, okay, you need to do an affidavit to disclose your conflict of interest. Here's how to do that. Here's the form. Pretty simple. And that might be it. Or they might say, okay, you need to fill out this form. Also, based on your interest, you need to actually recuse. Here's how to recuse yourself. Here's what to say. Here's a script. City attorneys are great about that. So that's kind of the piece on it. It does happen a lot in small towns.
It's true that in a vote, that's the only time that you can legally abstain.
Sort of. I mean, if you're recusing, you actually shouldn't be up there at all.
Right.
You should have departed the room, and when the item's over,
I-
hopefully somebody comes and
I've
touches
been,
you.
I've been in an issue when I was on the other city council, where something came up and the guy didn't realize that he was involved with what was being done. So when it came time for the vote, he abstained.
Yeah. The quick abstention when you don't realize you have a conflict, and then like halfway through the item, you're like, oh crap. Then that's a good reason for an abstention. Yeah, generally speaking, abstentions shouldn't generally happen. You do sometimes see them as a form of protest. I don't ever get too worked up about them. But something to be aware of.
And Also on that, when you're voting as people, and it's a yes or no vote, and you don't say anything, that's automatically a yes vote, correct?
I don't remember that for sure.
Can you say that again?
If like they're doing like a roll call vote and they come to you and you just don't say a thing, you just sit quietly, does it automatically become a yes vote? And I don't know that answer because I've never seen it happen.
None of us are quiet.
Yeah, we will speak our minds.
I don't know either. I know when we were going through COVID, when we transitioned into all the virtual meetings, there were a lot of times that the chairs would say, anybody that opposes, make your vote known now. And everybody else that didn't, of course, was.
Yeah, usually like, anybody for, aye, anybody against?
There again,
Okay, motion carries. Usually on
City.
voice votes, it's very easy. It's if you have a roll call.
I see.
City I was in, I won't mention Bartlett, it came up on an issue that we voted, and one of the council people did not vote, and the attorney told him that that's an automatic yes.
It's entirely possible. I've just never seen it happen.
Because it's either got to go one way or the other.
Yeah.
He said according to Robert's Rules of Order, it's an automatic yes. I don't know that for a fact, but that's what the attorney said.
Maybe that was something written into their council meeting rules, yeah.
Oh,
City
could be, yeah.
specific, yeah.
That could be too.
Yeah.
He said Robert's Rules, so I don't know.
Yeah. Final thoughts. Key thing, this is kind of like my parting words. Congratulations, you survived. Planning's a political process, whether you like it or not. It's unfortunate, but it's the reality. Planning is an opportunity for consensus building. That's something that you can do as a commission, is you can survey people, you can have meetings, talk about things. Planning is that first touch that a lot of people have with local government. That's something to keep in mind. One of the things that I used to do in Buda, because it was a fast-growing city and people were moving in all the time, is if it was a contentious issue on the agenda, at the beginning of the meeting, I had a great relationship with my commission chair. I would just tell him, like, call the meeting to order. Give me 5 minutes at the beginning of the meeting before you do anything else. And I would spend 5 minutes explaining what was about to happen and what the public should expect. Because a lot of times they're kind of like deer in the headlights when that public hearing's going on because they've never seen it before. So I kind of explain, here's what's going to happen, here's what it's going to feel like. You're going to see awkwardness when you say something to the commission and they just sit politely. The reason they're sitting politely is their job is purely to listen at that point. They are not supposed to talk, so don't be offended. And it can help kind of cool people off a little bit. So it's useful to do that kind of thing. And then plan implementation is critical to public trust. What I will tell you is do not adopt a plan if you're not going to implement it. Because what happens with that is you had a public input process. People think that they've told you what they want. If you listened to all of their feedback and then turned around and didn't say anything or didn't do anything, what did you just tell the public? We listened to you and we didn't give two craps what you said. Have a nice day. What happens the next time you want to ask for feedback? Do they participate? Nope. They find something better to do with their time. So focusing on implementation is very important. I also often say in plan making, cities typically only do what they can measure, just as a broad rule. So be thinking about how to make things measurable and measurable results. What are you trying to get to? What metrics? That kind of thing. That can help you push towards implementation. Always think about what are the little things you can do. I often say, like, what's the smallest thing you can do? Go do that, then do the next thing. That's how you build momentum. That's how you get people to believe. When we get a downtown plan adopted, like they ask, what should we do first? And I usually tell them, go pressure wash the sidewalk and repaint the parking stripes. Not a lot of effort, not a lot of expense, but it's an immediate message of like, okay, we're going to start doing some things. So thing to keep in mind. Also, big balancing act, you are not going to make everybody happy. So if that's your game in life, you're going to be disappointed in this. Developers have certain things they're after. They want highest and best use. You'll also hear me say that that's not a real thing. Maximize short-term gain, that is a real thing. They want to get in and get out. Market demands, they are responding to something the market is asking them to do. They don't do things to lose money as a rule. They're relying on their past experience. They want to be profitable, and they want low-cost, high return. That's what's motivating them. I'm going to spoil this for you. A lot of those things they want actually align to what cities want. You want a successful project. Like, you don't want a failed development project. That's not good for you. So you have a lot of shared interests. What y'all are looking for, quality development, long-term benefits. You know, how does it perform fiscally? Is it compatible? Is it going to mess up your infrastructure? And a big thing that's really emerging, market resilience. Basically, is what's being built going to be obsolete tomorrow? I often point towards strip centers on that because I have seen many a failed strip center, and they are kind of hard to do anything with later. There's actually a whole course of study and planning about retrofitting strip centers. And so those are things to keep in mind as you go through this. You have survived. I am done here.
It was
Y'all will have
outstanding.
the best meetings ever.
Thank you. Yes.
You will be the envy. You know, Belton's going to look west and be like, how can we be more like them?
All right.
Certain of it. But yeah, that's the story.
No, thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the public-private partnerships, that kind of thing? Great question.
I'll go ahead and give you permission to do that, but I want to have, not for me, but for the city, I want this new swimming pool and the new gymnasium
Yeah,
and
okay.
my streets redone.
Yeah, that's where you have to apply the reasonableness. And there has to be, you'll hear a term sometimes called rational nexus. What that means is whatever you're asking for as an exaction on the development has to be directly related to the impact of the project. So, you know, an example is in California. I'm going to use a California example because that's the famous state law on it, or the famous court case. You had cities that were saying, you are developing your property, you are required to provide public access to the beach. Well, what was the connection to that? Because they were building a house, they have to require public access? That doesn't make sense. That's not connected. It failed the rational nexus test. Now, usually what you see with a public-private partnership, it's not happening right at a meeting. There is some kind of agreement that's being done, and usually, most public-private partnerships are initiated by the city, where they say, hey, we are looking to do X, Y, or Z. We are interested in partners and conversations. They'll actually put out a request for information or a request for proposal or even request for qualifications. Just be like, hey, we want to have a conversation about approaches to doing this. A common one is recreation centers, where cities like, we want a recreation center, but we don't want to be in the business of running a recreation center because they're paying. And so they say, well, we want this, so let's put out a request for proposal. And maybe it's that you have a piece of land for it already. And so it's, we have land to do this. We are interested in a proposal to do this. And who will respond to that? If you have a YMCA in the region, they will usually respond to that. Hospitals will respond to that in this particular example. A lot of them do public health initiatives. Things like that. And that's how usually they start, is off of something like that. If it's something that's happening right in front of you before your eyes at a meeting, something's gone wrong. And that's where it does start to look like extortion. Does that kind of answer your question?
There was a situation that I don't know exactly true. They were building some higher-end houses. Part of the deal was to get your building permitted to put some sidewalk out front. And it was not, the sidewalk was kind of knocking along that community. They were trying to squeeze it.
Yeah, it depends on if that was already a requirement in the books. Like if you had a ordinance that required sidewalks, then yeah, you can do that. If it's just like you want to build a house and we think you have to put in a sidewalk now and there's no standard for it, that's sketchy. that can get you in trouble.
I think it goes back to the optics.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you can
Yeah,
have that question right.
yeah, if it looks like a sin, it's a sin.
Unfortunately.
To put on my best church lady voice. Yeah. I think that technically means you're at the end of your agenda.
Yeah, I know. Thank you very much for your.
One more item, I don't know what you want to do.
Okay.
Yeah, the priorities, I'd like to get into it.
Yes. I had it up, my thing went blank. Okay, next item on the agenda. Would you read it?
Discuss possible priorities for the upcoming year. And I know some of you are anxious to talk about this. My thought, though, is we can have a brief discussion. But as referenced, maybe it would be better for us to come back together and coordinate and collaborate after we have received that comprehensive plan and everybody has had time to look at it. That way, we can speak to possible priorities, having some information in front of us.
Okay, I love that idea. The only thing that I was thinking about on priorities is it seems like our city needs to get our ducks in order on planning and zoning. Like maybe formally having an ordinance to establish planning and zoning. So I would put that as a high priority. We don't need the comprehensive plan for that. But I like, yeah, when we get into the nitty gritty, so I don't know if we ratify P and Z in an ordinance or how, I don't know the legality of it.
Yeah, I think we'll look through that. And,
Okay.
Everybody was in here pretty much for the whole P and Z meeting. We are starting the process of reviewing the ordinances that govern that body, really. So some of this may automatically come before the council as we go through this process that's supposed to have been done every 5 years, which of course has been done like clockwork as it's supposed to.
And the only other, I had a couple other things, and that is, I don't know if P and Z is involved in that master plan that Temple is doing with 317, but I would hope that P and Z would get connected on that master plan.
EDC, I think, is the most involved.
EDC is
Yeah, I know, but I think it's planning and zoning too.
Morgan's Point planning and zoning would deal only with our city limits.
Correct.
So, well,
But it's
Timber-
coming down to the pit and the Four Corners.
right. So
It's coming in our city.
So that
Yes.
plan comes all the way, the portion we've paid for comes all the way to the Four Corners.
Yeah.
And covers part of the pit. I can share,
Are we
can share.
talking about a comprehensive plan, or are we
No.
talking, because you're saying master plan?
It's a feasibility study. that
Temple
Temple's doing.
master
Temple-
plan.
It's actually the Temple's master plan.
Master plan
And they have included us, the city paid for part of it, the EDC paid for part.
I didn't
And
realize.
it was construed
Well, I'd love
as-
to have
as-
you involved.
It was construed as really the wastewater treatment plant.
Yeah, but that's too narrow.
But it's actually the city of Temple's master plan, which we are participating in.
So that,
Sorry, I'm trying
It's-
to wrap
it's
my
okay.
brain about we can be involved in, so can we make other people, can we tell other cities what to do with our master plan?
No, they're going to give us their master plan. We're just participating. Like I think Carrie and Urian attend the meetings.
Jimbo.
Jimbo, okay.
Yeah, I'll send you what they've sent us and we have some other.
And I don't know if you should be involved in attending one of the meetings. I don't know, but
talk to Linda Bridges too, because
Yeah.
she's been pretty involved with it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Safe travels.
and the only other thing that I had that doesn't include the comprehensive plan would be, I'm excited about you guys getting involved in capital improvements. We are just going to start that process, and I'd love to see planning and zoning involved in that also.
One thing that I would like to think about is, that it keeps bugging me when I think about our setbacks being 15 feet, 20 feet, 25. I would like to see planning and zoning look into the zoning and come up with a reasonable plan. And we could best people who are currently on a 15-foot lot and say that we would have to kind of not use that term grandfathered in, but grandfather them in. But I would like to see us kind of make something consistent in whatever we think is reasonable. So,
But does that mean everybody's surveys need to be redone on their property?
No, the current laws, our zoning laws say that you have to have a 25-foot setback before you can build on my property.
Yeah, mine
But
is
on
too.
but on the property next door, that was zoned at a different time, it might say a 20-foot setback.
Oh, okay.
And then there's another property right next door to that that's 15, because it just depends when it was set up. And so to find consistency in our setback laws would just make sense to me. I think that would be a nice thing. No, no. Right, consistent, yeah, just consistent for the future, yes, yeah. I think.
Jay has brought that up before at our meeting, and we've had documentation on what it is right now. But I always kind of look at that, it's kind of like with the design thing, here's 80 pages, why don't you guys tell us what you want to do? That's not what I look at our committee to be doing. We need a draft of something that's come from staff or from whatever, us writing a policy. We can do that in 2 hours.
That's the other thing I noticed is you guys are supposed to be having a professional planning staff work with you. I'm assuming that's the COG.
That's me and that's James.
So I'm
Our
not
ILA.
sure if we don't need to extend your ILA. Right now, it's just ordinances.
It does
Two.
any planning activities,
Oh,
which
any
is,
planning activities. Okay, because to me, they would be your staff.
But-
planning
That is the
part.
whole reason we hired them, because they handed us 80 pages and said, here, make an ordinance. And we're like, we don't know what we're doing.
but to go to that point, and maybe I'm veering off into the Netherlands, it's probably something that council needs to keep in mind as they go through the upcoming budget process and staffing needs of your city is a professional planner on staff possibly, even if it's a mixed type position.
Well, you would be perfect to give us like what we might need. You know our city, you know planning. So we would be open to,
And I'm happy to help. I think it's something to keep in the back of your minds as we keep moving forward and, the city keeps moving forward.
well, we've just invested a ton of money in the comprehensive plan. And we're not going to let that sit on a shelf. So there will be activities, planning activities coming out of that. And we
I'm
want
not
to,
disagreeing with that. I think your P and Z is requesting assistance so we don't get sued. Because we want to do those ordinances, but we have, this is,
Right.
again, volunteer position on top of the 6 other volunteer positions on top of the paid job, that we're trying to get that done, but we need assistance so we
Agree.
don't make it worse.
yeah.
But
Right.
it's,
And that's really why I provided this. You can look at it. You can not make any changes. When we come back, hopefully me and James can work on getting some red line drafted, provide that to you, make it a process. We don't want you to be 15 hours a week
Right.
P&Z zoning,
We
ordinance
had
review.
one on the estate,
state residential.
residential, and that one I thought worked fairly well. We had a little bit better draft to look at. We discussed certain points and we moved on. Here's our recommendation. Rather than,
It did work well.
it's on. Hello. Okay.
So that was something that came from P and Z that worked well. Is that what you're
I
saying?
thought so, yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
think
way it
that-
should work.
That was, Connie came in and she did she drafted and brought that to you, and it was a couple month process though.
Yeah.
I want to say, to make sure everything was captured.
Made it a lot easier.
Okay, any final comments from anybody?
Yes. As your chairman, thank y'all for staying late. Thanks council for showing up on a night that you were supposed to have off. I do think it was productive, and I'm glad we're all in one room working on being a happy extended family.
Yes. Well, we thank you for inviting us, and I appreciate being here, and I do think that we are all in the same little city, and we all want to be happy neighbors, so thank you. Any other comments? before we close?
I have just one thing, and I know having, somebody here to kind of speak to this, I don't know how everybody felt about it. But I think if you think of something later, this really can spark some of the thought process on how we can move forward and work together. So if we need to have him come back out to speak to something more specific, or I reach back out to somebody else, I'm happy to do that so that we can keep moving forward.
Yeah, I knew nothing about P and Z, so I definitely had to do homework before I got here. So.
I'll confess, I did a whole lot of research. I learned more about P and Z from researching this than I did serving on the committee. So, okay.
Okay, thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Agenda is completed, meeting is adjourned.
Do the thing.
Thank you.